This afternoon's talk is going to be Dr. Rick Snyder, and he's actually commercial high tunnel production specialist, nationally known. So let's give him a hand for this presentation coming up, and we'll take questions too.
Thank you, Robert, and good to see you again. Well, this is a fun talk. We're going to hit on a lot of the weird things that can happen to tomatoes and how to prevent some of them, how to deal with some of them once you get them. Hopefully you'll never get any of these things happen. So I always like to say I'm going to show you a lot of bad things that can happen to tomatoes, but it doesn't mean they're all going to happen in your greenhouse or your tunnel. So don't worry. You might see some of them. I don't think you'll see all of them. If you see all of them, call Robert Balick. It's his fault. So I like to call this when bad things happen to good tomatoes, because you're doing all the right things. You're trying to grow a good crop. You're trying to do all the right things with the environment, the nutrition, fertilizer program, your irrigation system, and you're scouting your plants. You're walking the greenhouse every day. Still, some things are going to happen, all right? It's almost like real life, things are still going to happen. So I mentioned this before. I'm going to mention it again because this is one of the more important things. Make sure your temperature control is working correctly. Make sure you do have a high-low thermometer. So if you have cold symptoms, but your thermostat's set at 64, you can find out, was it really 64 in there or was it 58? Because thermostats are a guideline. They're not all that accurate, okay? They may be off a degree, they may be off 5 degrees. So you do want a high-low thermometer. And these are the other systems I mentioned before for environmental control. You want to have something for cooling, you want to have stuff for heating, you want ventilation, the fans, and the horizontal airflow. There's also vertical airflow fans. It just depends which way they're blowing. So they're either blowing horizontally or they're blowing vertically down on the crop. So either one will work. Crowding, I mentioned this before too, but this is important. A lot of problems happen when you crowd. And the take-home notes on this is that if you put more plants in, the yield per plant goes down. The yield per greenhouse stays the same. So you can buy more seeds, fertilizer, and grow more plants and get the same yield out of the greenhouse, or you can just do enough for 5 square feet per plant and get the same yield, but more per plant. Same yield per greenhouse, more per plant, but better quality. And it's the quality that counts because you're getting your best price for #1 quality. Anything that's a cull, you're either selling it as a cull for half price or some reduced price, or you give it to your in-laws. Doesn't look pretty, but it's still edible. Okay, water quality is important. Just like the water we drink, we don't want to drink water that is contaminated. We don't want metals, heavy metals in it, lead, iron, arsenic. We don't want that stuff in our water. We also don't want water that is that has livestock in it, like bacteria. We don't want living things in there like E. coli and all that. So we want good quality water. The tomatoes need good quality water, and you can't tell by looking at it. You can't even tell by sticking your finger in it if it's good quality water. You can't even tell by tasting it. But if you send it to your lab, and every state has a lab or several labs, they can analyze it. When you send water to a lab, make sure they know it is for greenhouse tomatoes. You're not testing for potable water. You're not testing for household water. You're not testing for irrigating trees in the yard. It's for greenhouse tomatoes. So then they will know what to check for. So how do you get a good sample? You get a good sample by having a clean container to start with. So what if you take a milk jug and you finish your milk and you say, well, I need to go get a sample. So you fill up the milk jug. Well, there's a lot of residue from the milk sticking to the walls, even if you rinse it. There's still residue. So forget about milk jugs. Get a water jug. You know, go to Walmart or some store, get a gallon jug of bottled water, something like 68 cents. Use the water, dump the water, irrigate with the water, and then fill it with the water that you will be using for irrigation. In fact, I would put water in it, rinse it with that water, dump it out. You want a really good, clean, pure sample. So fill it with your irrigation water, cap it, tape it over the top, and get it to your lab, whether you're driving it there or you're bringing it to your county agent and the county agent delivers it, or you're shipping it. You can ship it. It depends on the lab. Ask them how they want to get it. And that's why I say not all water is created equal. Sometimes people will say, well, I have a well, so I know the water's good. Not necessarily. It could be really high in carbonates. It could be really high in iron. The funny thing is, it can change over time. Like community water, if you're getting water from your water department, your city water or county water, sometimes the water quality changes over time because they're required to add chemicals to the water, and they don't add them necessarily the same amount every day. I mean, some things might be once a week or once a month where they might put a big dose of something in there, and the water quality will go up and down for different things. So you sort of have to keep an eye on that, maybe test it more than once to make sure it's good quality, exactly what you want. I mentioned this, so I'm not going to go through that again, but you do want to take tissue analysis, and after you do, you get a report, something like this. This is a real new one our Mississippi State lab did, and it comes back to the producer, and we also send ours to copy to the county agent in that county. You probably do that here too. And it goes through all of the elements, the NPK, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, and boron. Tells you for the macronutrients, the ones that are larger amounts, what percent is in the leaves. And for the ones that are very small amounts, it tells you parts per million. So the results are here, and then the acceptable range is here. So like this one had 5.2% nitrogen. The range is 3.5 to 5. It's a little bit high. It's not outrageously high. It's a little high. When it's a little high like that, I might see vegetative shoots coming out the end of a flower stalk. You ever see those? You have a flower cluster, and at the end of it are more leaves. That's not typical growth, but if there's too much nitrogen, tomatoes will do that. And so on with everything else here. It shows you the amount. It shows you what it should be. And you can very easily go through and see if something is high or something is low. Some things, when they're a little high or a little low, it doesn't make a lot of difference. Some things, if calcium gets too low, that's when you'll be getting blossom end rot. You know, if potassium's low, you may lose some flowers. The flowers may not set well. They may drop off. If nitrogen's low, you get a light green color on the plant all over, top to bottom. If it's really bad, it will be yellow. And it won't just be yellow at the top or yellow at the bottom. It'll be pretty much everywhere. So we'll look at some additional things that can happen. Maintain your equipment. So every day when you walk the greenhouse, are the fans on? I mean, this is a lot of these things you can do in a second. Are the fans coming on? Are the vents opening when the fan's on? Are the vents staying closed? That would be a problem. Are your emitters dripping? How do you know if your emitters are dripping without picking up every single one? Is there any wilt? If you see a plant wilt, check it. It could be a broken stem. It could be a clogged emitter. It could be a disease. So you can easily check that. First, look at the stem. See if there's a crack in it, if it's broken. If it is, take some tape it up, and it will usually heal. If you catch it before too long, it will grow back together very nicely. So that's, you know, the emitters are working if the plants are not wilted. The injectors mix your fertilizer, and the pumps get that fertilizer water out to the plants. only use vented heaters in a greenhouse, only vented. That means you have combustion of a fossil fuel, whether it's a diesel oil or propane or natural gas or something else, and that exhaust has to go either out a stack through the roof or out a stack through the end wall. It has to get out. You don't want to leave any exhaust gases in the greenhouse because of carbon monoxide and ethylene. Both of these tend to work together to cause damage to the plant, but the worst thing they cause is flower drop. So what happens if all your flowers drop? You just try to sell the leaves, right? Doesn't sell for very much. So there are vendors, you've probably heard of them, and I've heard of them, that say, well, their heaters are 100% efficient, so there's no exhaust. Really? It's not possible. The only ones that would fit that are electric heaters. If you buy an electric heater, there's no exhaust, right? But you wouldn't heat a whole greenhouse on electric heat. It would cost a lot. A little hobby house, sure, you can put electric heater in there. So don't trust that, and there are ventless heaters for chicken houses, which are fine. Chickens do not drop flowers, okay? Chickens don't have the same problems. They can tolerate certain levels of carbon monoxide that tomatoes can't. So let's stay away from these chicken house heaters, even if the salesman tells you, well, no, these are safe. We use them in chickens all the time. Okay, so ethylene and carbon monoxide, gas will kill flowers, and that really reduces yield. So here's what it looks like. Some really good pictures. Well, that's just a dried up flower. And you can see these are fading away too. They're turning yellow. They're not going to do anything. But the tops of the plants really stand out. The leaves are skimpy looking, and they twist. They can turn upside down. They can hang down like this, but they're not wilted. If you touch them, they're not soft and wilty. They're firm. But look for the twisting of leaves and the dropping of flowers, or dead flowers. And then try to track it down as soon as possible, because it will not heal itself. It will just get worse. So what ethylene levels are too high? Well, there are two types, chronic and acute. So chronic is a low dose over a long period. Acute is a higher dose over a short period. Either one of these will hurt. So the long-term chronic is just 0.01 to 0.05 parts per million. That is really a very, very small amount. In fact, it's hard to measure unless you have sophisticated equipment to measure that. If you have, like your gas company, sometimes you'll have them come out and check. Usually their gauge measures in percent, not in parts per million. So to measure 1%, you'd have to have 10,000 parts per million. So on their gauge, it'll show 0 because it's under 1%. So it'll show 0%, but it would have to go over 10,000 ppm to show 1%. So those gauges just will not help you. The acute is when you get a higher dose. So 1 part per million of ethylene for just 3 hours can cause your flowers to fall off. So these are things we have to be really aware of. Here's an estimate, 15 to 20% of heated greenhouses have air pollution problems. So these problems can be with a new greenhouse with a brand new heater, because the heater's not adjusted properly. You want it to burn hot to maximize combustion. You want a blue flame that burns as much as possible. Or it could be from an older greenhouse, and I don't mean old, like 30 years old. When heaters get even 7, 8, 9 years old, sometimes the firebox gets pinholes in it. Sometimes the stack gets holes. Sometimes the joints in the stack start to separate. And this is how exhaust gas will get into the greenhouse. So those are things to look for. So here's a common scenario. Grower installed a new propane heater in the fall, supposed to have a heater, didn't know about venting, or was told he didn't have to vent it. So within a few days, tomato leaves start to droop, but they're not wilty soft, they're just drooping. That's epinasty. And the root system is fine. So it looks like wilt, like you might think bacterial wilt, so you start looking for symptoms of bacteria, and they're not there. Flowers fall off, upper leaves twist. So that's something to be aware of. Okay, now humidity. Does it ever get humid in Missouri? No? Never? Okay. All right. Humidity in the greenhouse. Perfect humidity. Okay, if you can accomplish this, then you're really, really good. 70%. So set your greenhouses on 70% humidity. You can't do this. You just can't do it. So since we can't do that, we just have to know how to deal with it. In humid climates, you're not going to be able to do it. Transpiration is the process of water passing from into the roots, up the stems, and out the leaves. And all plants do this. They transpire. So it's the movement of water. And that water goes into the air. So a lot of the humidity in the greenhouse comes from transpiration. And the rest of it comes from evaporation. If there's water on the floor, if there's water on the leaves, like in the morning, condensation, there's water on the plastic, and then it evaporates. That's more humidity in the air. So it's coming from both places. The reason that tomatoes transpire is to cool them. So suppose it's 85 degrees in the greenhouse. They're passing water through their system to keep the plants cool enough to function properly. We drink water, and it helps cool us too. High humidity and low air movement slow down transpiration. So if it's already really humid in there, transpiration is not as effective. It doesn't happen as much. So the plants don't cool themselves as well. So that's not good. And low air movement reduces transpiration. So that's how plants can get heat stressed. High humidity, low air movement. So that's why a lot of times we're talking about not only ventilation with your exhaust fans, but the horizontal airflow fans. Keep the air moving. And a way to tell if you have enough air movement, look in the greenhouse. Are the leaves moving a little bit? Are the strings hanging down and moving a little bit? That's what you want to see. You always want to see some movement in there. So humidity. So sometimes you go in a greenhouse and in the morning there's moisture on the fruit. Usually it's in the morning. And or moisture, when you look up at the plastic, you see droplets of water on the plastic. Well, that's not good. It means the air is saturated. It's 100% humid. You can't get any more humid than 100%. Even in Mississippi, maybe in Alabama you can. Feels like it. One of the problems humidity causes is disease. And if you can avoid disease, it's way better than trying to eradicate disease. If you don't have a resistant variety to this, this is called leaf mold. It's the actual name, leaf mold. Makes yellow areas on the top of the leaf, and right under each yellow area, it's tan, brown, and fuzzy. If the variety says C5 resistance, it has resistance to this. So older varieties don't, newer varieties mostly do, but I would check that. And there are other diseases that come from high humidity too. So what do we get with high humidity? Lower yield, poorer fruit quality, poor fruit set. The pollination is not that effective because it tends to clump in the wet air, and that makes it heavier. You know, one grain is not that heavy, it'll float in the air. You get 20 grains together and they're heavy and they drop. So they don't pollinate as well. With low, this isn't going to happen here, but if your humidity is too low, the stigma can dry out, so the pollen grain won't stick to it when it transfers. But you're not going to see that. So if there's condensation, it's too humid. To reduce, we're going to talk about, next slide, about how to control it. So how do we control high humidity? There are things you can do. Exhaust fans move the plants and help with the high temperature and humidity. So the thermostat is set at a set point to turn on the exhaust fans. If it stays too humid in there, you can turn them on manually. Get that moisture out whenever you need to. And the HAF fans stir the air, help dry the leaves and flowers. It's usually worse in the mornings, especially in the cooler months. Like in the winter months, you'll go in there in the morning, you walk through, and you might see condensation. The afternoon, you might see no condensation. So because the percent humidity is the highest, the relative humidity is the highest when it's cooler. So here's what you do in the mornings if you see that. Turn on the exhaust fans. What if it's not hot enough to for the exhaust fans to come on by themselves? Doesn't matter. Turn on the exhaust fans, even if it's 5 minutes. Blow out that hot, humid air, and then turn the fans off. And if it's too cold, the heater will come on for a few minutes. You burn a little fuel. The air will be a lot drier, and that's what you want. You want some drier air. Okay, other things that could happen, and remember, I said these will not all happen. Some of them may happen. So tomato troubles. You know what this is, right? Who knows? Yeah. Blossom end rot. Okay, everybody knows blossom end rot. So blossom end rot is not a fungal rot. It's not a disease problem. This is a fertilizer problem and a water problem. So let's go down this list. It's not enough calcium in the fruit. And remember, this is not going to be mushy like a soft rot or let's see, buckeye rot can even get mushy after a while. Keep the calcium level up. It needs to be in the 150 to 200 part per million range. That's recommended. It's in almost all fertilizers. Most of you will be using calcium nitrate as your sole source of calcium. So you want to make sure you have enough calcium nitrate. If the water source happens to be high in calcium, in some areas your water is high, then you can use less calcium nitrate. So nitrogen, you don't want to over-fertilize with the nitrogen. It's a common home garden thing to just keep throwing it on, making the plants really, really dark green, bushy, beautiful looking leaves. But that can interfere with the calcium, especially ammonium nitrogen. It can interfere with calcium uptake. Avoid uneven watering in dry periods. So you may have a condition where you know you have enough calcium. You're giving it, say, 170 parts per million. But if your plants wilt at any time, the plants will stop moving calcium up through the plant into the fruit. So even if you have enough calcium, you can still get blossom end rot if you don't water enough, or if you don't water frequently enough. So let's touch base on that a little bit. Suppose I tell growers, which I do, half a gallon per plant per day. That's my rule of thumb, half a gallon per plant per day. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but if somebody's giving way less than that, they're probably not watering enough. So if I talk to a grower has blossom end rot pretty bad. You hardly ever get one fruit with blossom end rot. It doesn't happen. So if it's pretty bad and I ask them how much calcium they're putting on, and they tell me, and it's good. So then I'll ask them how much water are they putting on, and it's good. They're giving a half a gallon per plant per day. Then my next question is, how often do you water? And if it's like 4 times a day or 6 times a day, it's not frequently enough. So they're giving enough water, but it's too much at each interval. So a lot of it's just draining out the bottom, it's gone, and then 2 or 3 hours go by and the plants are wilted. So what you do in that case is same amount of water, but increase the intervals. If you're doing every 2 hours, change it to every hour, less per hour. Same amount per day. So reduce the amount per event, per watering. you have to have actively growing roots for calcium uptake. And if the roots dry out, the root hairs die, so they cannot take up calcium. Once it revives, the plant revives, gets more water, they'll grow more root hairs. But in the meantime, some of these fruit are damaged. And this is what happens if you have no calcium. The terminals, meaning the tips, will stop growing, turn brown, and then turn black. But the root tips also stop growing, turn brown, turn black, and die. So that means they can't take up any nutrients after a while, so the plants are done. So try not to skip calcium. It's very important. Okay, we did that. Okay, here's another one. And remember, horticulture has its own terminology, which is very complicated. So what do you call these? Cracking. Okay, so you're right up on your terminology here. This is cracking. However, this is splitting. Very technical. So cracking is deeper, but it's generally dry. Splitting is just the skin deep, and it's usually moist. And radial cracking radiates from the top down. So this is radial cracking. Concentric cracking makes circles, like bullseyes around this way, okay? That's just the different types of cracking and splitting that can happen. However, water is responsible for a lot of this, and it's mostly if you don't have enough water, and then you make up for it by giving it a little too much water. But it's not always your fault. Sometimes it's the weather. So suppose you're getting good sunny days and the plants are getting enough water, and then you get a few cloudy days in a row, you're giving them the same amount of water, but it's too much for the plants because they're not transpiring like they were before. So this can cause some cell bursting, and you'll get some cracks and splits. So that's the main thing. Temperature, low temperature can also affect this splitting, but you don't want to go under 64 anyway because of other reasons. How about this pretty looking crop here? What do you call that? Cat facing. Anybody know why it's called cat facing? It looks more like the other end. But anyway, just a thought popped into my head. Okay, cat facing are irregular, malformed fruit, dimples, crevices, cracks, holes, splits, but they're in the bottom, or the bottom, and it can go beyond the bottom sometimes if you have a lot of trouble. It's usually cool temperature. So like outside in the field or in the garden, it's usually the first tomatoes that form on the plant because they were put in early so you could beat your neighbors or whatever. So the first fruit will have a lot of cat facing, but then as the season warms up, you might not see any more at all. It can also be caused by very high temperature. So just keep that in mind. But it's usually the cool temperature early season or the thermostat set too low, like at 60, and then you'll get a lot more of this kind of fruit. So you can eat it. You can cut off the bad parts. You can eat it. You can't sell it. I wouldn't try selling it. Leaf roll. I was talking to somebody during lunch about this, leaf roll. This one is not a disease. Now, there are some diseases that will make the leaves curl and roll. There are some viruses. But this is one that you see more on older leaves, closer to the bottom of the plant. And it just happens when there's plenty of moisture and high fertility. And it might scare you and look bad, but it doesn't hurt the plant. It doesn't hurt the yield. Now, if you just have a curling at the top of the plant, I would suspect something else like a virus or a herbicide contaminant. But these are actually rolled up. They're not, I wouldn't call it curled. It's more like a roll. And now we have a problem where, okay, these fruits set, but look at this. Missed fruit, missed fruit, missed. A lot of skipped fruit. So this is poor set. And like we said, poor set of flowers means not as much fruit, which means you don't make as much money. So blossom drop hurts your yield, and it's not from one thing. It can be any stress on the plant at all. So you have to be the detective and figure out which of these is likely to have caused it. So temperature too high or temperature too low, day temperature above 90, or night temperature above 75. Either one can cause this. And I mean, we get a lot of nights in the summer where, I mean, in the evening it'll cool down to 80, and then it'll stay there. It'll just stick around 8 in the low 80s all night. That's not good. So night temperature above 64, I know I keep hammering on that, but that's important. Too much nitrogen, too little nitrogen, high humidity, ethylene, like from the burner. All of these can cause flower drop. So keep those in mind, and then if you're getting flower drop, try to go through your list and cross out the ones that it couldn't possibly be, and you'll narrow down the list. Small tomatoes, really small tomatoes, and not cherry tomatoes. They're just normal beefsteak types that are too small. So fertility, water, pollination. The easy way to tell is to slice them transversely, so this way. If the tomato's sitting on the table, slice it that way, horizontally, and look inside. If you don't see a lot of seeds in there, then you didn't get a lot of pollination. And if you see gaps, the chambers are called locules. If you look in the locules and there's not a lot of gel, like Dr. Kemba was talking about, that gel that is in the locules, if there's not a lot of gel, it's because there aren't a lot of seeds also. So you have gaps, and that's from poor pollination. The other way you can tell, once you get used to this, is look at the sides of the fruit. See how flat that is? And then there's a sharp angle, and then it's flat. This is a flat area, that's a flat area, flat, flat. That's because the locules didn't pump up with gel. They're empty or almost empty. We like them full of seeds, full of gel. So that is a poor pollination problem. So if you're using a pollinator, the recommendation is pollinate every other day around midday. You want to pollinate when the humidity is the lowest. And as the temperature goes up, the relative humidity goes down. So lunchtime, skip lunch, go pollinate. Now, sometime around midday, you want to do your pollinating. If you have bees, have they been in there more than 8 weeks? Maybe your hive is weak. Maybe the bees are on their way out. So that's something to track down. Why is the pollination poor? Okay, now we get into the more confusing stuff, the yellowing of the leaves. Okay, so we're going to talk about different kinds of yellowing, and I'll try to keep this organized so it doesn't blur up in your head. The first type is interveinal. So interveinal means between the veins. So the veins are green, the space between the veins is yellow. Interveinal chlorosis is what it's referred to. So if it's the upper leaves, it could be iron deficiency or manganese deficiency. These are the most common if it's only at the top of the plant. The rest of the plant looks good. The upper new leaves have some yellowing. If it's lower leaves or halfway up the plant, probably magnesium deficiency. And from just years of experience, it seems to happen after the fourth cluster is set. A lot of growers will say, my plants were fine, I just set the fourth cluster, now I'm getting this yellowing. Is it at the top? No, it's down at the bottom. Probably magnesium. Now, what if it's not interveinal? So if it's just light green or yellow all over the plant, the nitrogen level is probably low. That affects the whole plant. If it's just the bottom leaves and they're totally yellow, not interveinal, just yellow, sickly looking, they're shaded, and called senescence or aging, old age. So they're not producing anymore. You can snap those off. It's not going to hurt a thing to snap off yellow leaves at the bottom. Next, we have disease, and the most common that will cause yellowing are early blight or target spot. And to people who grow tomatoes, these look the same, and they're so similar that you don't need to know, is it target spot or is it early blight? Now, the pathologist will disagree with me, but he's not in the room now. He's over there. So they can tell them apart. I can't tell them apart. I don't think you can tell them apart. So they form small brown circles on the lower leaves. Bottom leaves, look for brown circles, and as the circles get bigger, they make a target spot, like a bullseye. That's how you can tell it's one of these. But as the spots increase, the leaves eventually turn yellow, and then they will fall off the plant. If they just fall off, then look at the next leaves up, and they may have the brown spots on them too. And then that's a sure thing. It's early blight, target spot, alternaria. And there are fungicides that control this very easily. Now we go to the yellowing on the fruit, just called generically uneven ripening. And it can be green stripes, streaks, it can be blotches. Sometimes on the bottom of the fruit there's like a green or yellow star-shaped thing that didn't ripen. Several possible causes here: high fertility with nitrogen or low potassium. Those are probably the most common. High temperature, when you get up into the 90s. Dr. Kemble talked about lycopene, one of the pigments in there, and that makes the tomato red. Lycopene dies when it gets up into 93, 94. It goes away. So you see green. You see the chlorophyll, the green pigment. There are certain viruses that can do this and certain kinds of white flies. So you can narrow it down by looking at your conditions. Keep the fertilizer correct, your nitrogen and potassium in particular. Keep them at the right level. Oh boy, this one, you won't get a lot of this, but occasionally a greenhouse has this, and it's called, anybody know what it's called? No, we're going to get to that though. Russeting. So if you have russeting on a potato, Irish potato, it costs more. If you have russeting on pears, it's great. It's valuable, right? The russet pears. But if you have it on tomatoes, it's terrible, because russet is like a fine crack in the surface. And when you have fine cracks, you have water loss. And then you have shrinkage. And then you can get invasion in there. But anyway, the shelf life is terrible on a russeted tomato. So that's the problem. You can't sell them because they'll deteriorate in the stores. The main reasons that this happens are moisture on the surface. So in the mornings you have moisture on the fruit, like that picture I showed earlier. Or it's getting near the end of the crop and you top the plant, you cut the top off, but you're not leaving enough leaves on the top. So there's stress in the plant from the water. The water is sort of stuck, and it doesn't have the leaf surface to get out. There's too much pressure, so it actually pops out through the tomato skin and breaks it. So to prevent that, use your horizontal airflow fans, keep the air moving, and leave 2 leaves above the highest fruit cluster. When you're terminating the crop a few weeks before the end, you want to cut the top off so you don't waste the plant's energy making tiny little fruit that you'll never harvest. Cut the top off, but leave a leaf, and then the cluster here. So you get a little shading and more leaf surface for transpiration. Here's the one you were talking about. Sun scald. Tomatoes get sun scald. Humans get sunburn. Very similar. But don't put SPF 50 on your tomatoes, okay? You can't sell them like that. Yeah, 20 is good. White blister area on the fruit. It's typically on the upper part of the fruit. Why is that? Yeah, that's where the sun hits them, right? So keep some good leaf cover on the plant so they get shade on the fruit. And then, like I was saying before, at the top of the plant, leave a couple of leaves above the highest cluster. Wilting, we talked briefly about it before. Wilting can be either a disease, which is called biotic from a life form, or abiotic, physical damage. This one had physical damage. See, there was a break there, and you can take florist tape, which is sticky on one side, and wrap it really good, and it will usually grow back together, unless you wait a week. You know, if it's broken for a week, forget it. Or if you don't happen to have some, does anybody have duct tape? Ever hear of duct tape? Any kind of tape, if you can tape it up so it'll hold together, you can put the string in there too to help support it. It will usually heal over. So you can save the top of the plant that way. Now we're getting into the more rare things. You may or may not ever see this, but every year a couple of growers call me with this weird problem. Bumps on the bottom of the leaf and sometimes on the stems. They're like warts. It's like a warty growth. But if you cut it, there's nothing inside there. It's plant tissue. It's not like an insect gall. So this is from cooler temperatures causing edema, more in cool and humid conditions. So that's just edema. And this is another thing, humans can get edema on their skin, but it doesn't look exactly like this. And now this one, it's spots, but it's not a disease. You know, sometimes we think disease every time we see spots on a leaf or on a stem. It's not always disease. This is from using a sprayer where the pressure is too high. So suppose you're using a backpack sprayer and you have it cranked all the way up, and you get some actual abrasion of the stems, the leaves, the fruit. So if it's a little bit on the leaves, probably not going to hurt anything. If it's on the fruit, forget it. I mean, you can't sell fruit like that. Now these can be open areas for invasion of fungi, like botrytis. So that's possible too. You don't want botrytis invading, because it's pretty bad. Okay, now we get a good one. What's this? It's not good. That's correct. It's not good. Who knows what caused this? Not you. Who knows what caused this on a tomato plant? What herbicide? Anybody want to? It's a herbicide, but this isn't 2,4-D. 2,4-D would make the twisting, but not the yellowing like this.
If not, then it is virus.
A virus? This one isn't virus. Anybody want to? One more guess. Not you. Ramon's looking, and he knows what it is. Okay, as soon as I say it, everybody's going to go, oh yeah, I knew that. I knew what that was. Okay, this is Roundup damage. Yeah, see, look at that. Oh yeah, I knew that. This is Roundup damage, and of course you should never spray Roundup in the greenhouse. You should never intentionally have Roundup. But what can happen, several things can happen. One is you can use a sprayer you shouldn't, but a person can use a sprayer for Roundup in the yard, fence rows, around trees, and then forget it had Roundup, and then, oh, I have whiteflies in my greenhouse. I better put something in there to kill the whiteflies. Same sprayer. And then spray it, and then, there's Roundup residue. This will happen. Kills the terminals of the plant. So it's bright yellow at the growing tips. And it's not just the top growing tips, it's the side shoots. So you have a nice green plant, bright yellow top, bright yellow side shoots. But that's Roundup damage. Yes, question?
So we have a question down here because if it's Roundup, why doesn't it kill the whole plant? And the other question is, if the sides are up on the high tunnel, can you use some outside herbicides instead?
Okay, two good questions. I'll start with the last one, and by then I'll forget the first one. Okay, the last one was on a high tunnel with the sides up, can I use Roundup around the outside? No, you really can't. And to go even further, on a greenhouse that doesn't have roll-up sides, so the plastic is solid, you cannot use it along the outside wall of the greenhouse because sometimes it will get in. And I've seen this several times where the entire row closest to that sidewall in a greenhouse is all yellow like this. And inside the greenhouse, it's not. So it works its way in somehow. I don't know how that works. So that's a clear no. The only time you can use Roundup around a tunnel or greenhouse is when there's no crop in there. So between crops, clean up outside. I still wouldn't spray it inside. But the perimeter and, 50 feet barrier around a greenhouse is a pretty good barrier to keep out insects and fungal spores and stuff. And, oh, I got it. The first question was, why isn't the plant dead? Okay, this could go two ways. If it's not a heavy dose, sometimes it will stay like this. And if there are if there are shoots still trying to come out and it's a light dose, they might be okay. But if it's a heavy dose, the plant is going to die. If all the terminals are killed, the plant's not going to grow anymore, so it's not going to produce anymore, and it's done. So you don't want any Roundup near your tomatoes. Roundup is not labeled to use in the vegetable garden. It's not labeled to use in the greenhouse. It's not labeled to use on your growing crop. It's labeled for fallow areas, unless there's something new on the label. That's the Roundup story. And then here's some good advice, like if you want to keep pests in the greenhouse over the winter, you can put your house plants in there. Sometimes your neighbors have their plants out on the patio, and it's going to get cold, and they know you have a greenhouse, and they say, would you mind just keeping a few of my house plants in your greenhouse tomato production house that you earn a living off of? And the answer is no, because there might be pests there that move right to the tomatoes. And then for those of you who aren't electricians, but you want to learn how, sketch this and try to copy this system exactly when you're doing your wiring. I'm not an electrician, so looks good to me. Diagnostics, get help when you need it. When there's something wrong in the greenhouse, try to get help. You have good hort agents, you have area agents, specialists. You can email your pictures. You have friends who grow greenhouse tomatoes. Just try to get help wherever you can. And the sooner you diagnose it, the better. You don't want it to get any worse. So this, I mentioned this one this morning, and there's the Spanish title if anybody needs that. And then you also have this. And this is a newer publication. And then these are available too. This one was revised just last year, the pest management. So that's all online, and color pictures and everything, and you're welcome to it, no charge. There's the Tomato Troubles publication. And the web page, same as this morning, it's in your handout. You don't need to scribble it all out real fast. And DVD set, if anybody wants a previous short course, just send me an email. Don't forget the dot there, Rick.Snyder. And like I said before, be a worrier, check everything, check your EC, check your pH, make sure there's no wilting in the greenhouse, look for insects, look for any kind of critters growing and thriving in there. Turn some leaves over. When I walk in a greenhouse, like the tour tomorrow, you'll notice I'll go up to a plant, I'll grab a leaf and just slowly turn it over to see if there are whiteflies on the bottom side. They like the underside better. So turn over a few leaves when you walk through. And there's nothing wrong with these. I just stuck that in to see what people would say. Now, I didn't bring anything to raffle, but I see Joe Kemble brought a laptop, so we're going to be raffling off the laptop. Whoa! How do we pick a winner? First one to the kitchen. No. Sure. Okay, I'm going to pick a number between 1 and 29. You ready? Everybody knows what their number is? Okay. 18. Congratulations. Okay, so nobody's going to go for the laptop then? You'd rather have strawberries? Okay, I understand. She would like the laptop. This young lady over here. Okay, so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or deflect them to somebody else. Either way. Yes?
Shade cloth.
Okay, the question is shade cloth with a question mark. You mean use it or not use it, or? Okay. If you're growing tomatoes when it's too hot, you need to do something. So Mississippi is further south. It's a longer hot season. It's just too hot in the summer. So I always tell growers, don't even try to grow in the summer. So they grow until early June, and that's the end of that crop. And then the fall crop, if they're doing a fall crop, will go in middle of August. So they're avoiding the hot spot in there. But it still gets really hot in April, and starting in April and through May and early June, it is too hot. So you have to have exhaust fans. So that's number one. Number two, if you want to get it a little cooler, either use a shade cloth on the exterior of the greenhouse, because that way the heat that it stops will radiate back out to the air rather than radiate into the greenhouse. So you want a shade cloth on top of the greenhouse. Or you want a pad and fan cooling system or a mist system. Either one of those will help cool the greenhouse. But shade cloth is not that expensive, and you can put it up when you need it and then take it off and reuse it. You know, save it from year to year.
On a tomato plant, I've heard a lot of different things about sunlight intensity. What's the real truth about how much, you know, because you're losing a certain percentage through, say, 2 layers of greenhouse plastic.
Right.
You put a shade cloth on there, does that affect the growth of the plant? Or is there, because I've heard that a tomato only needs about 50% of the sunlight.
Depends on, right. The question is, shade cloth, will it decrease the light so it's too low, and all the ramifications of that? You certainly don't want to put shade cloth up when there's not enough light. So you don't want it on the greenhouse like November, December, January, February, March. You just don't need it. When you put it on, it's because the greenhouse is too hot and there's way more light than the plants even need. A lot of it is being converted to heat in the greenhouse with something called the greenhouse effect, strangely enough. So you use it when you need it, and you take it off when you don't need it. That's the story with shade cloth. Question.
Why do we insist on using black shade cloth?
Okay, why black shade cloth instead of white? One thing is the white doesn't last as well over the years. It degrades faster. So black is better than white. What's even better than black is aluminized or silvery cloth over the top, because, of course, it reflects more of the light away. But that's the main reason to stay away from white. It just it's not as durable.
Very weak excuse.
Okay. Yes.
On your shade cloth, on your greenhouse, it needs to be about 35% shade. You go like 50% shade off, that's too much shade. Let's make it 35% or less. That helps you.
Yeah, that's good, and this depends on your latitude. Some of our growers use 50% shade cloth. Further south, the sun's even stronger, but for this area, 35 is good. So that's a good point. Yes?
Is there any secondary effects of the shade cloth, say, protecting exposure of the fruit in the field
Mhm.
to the side of the tomato.
So the,
If it's, say, a steady wind or something, you know, and pushing leaves off, and sun scald, it don't take much.
right.
Advantage to use the shade cloth to protect.
So the question is, will the shade cloth affect sun scald? Certainly, it will give more protection than not having a shade cloth. Because as you noted, in the field, it doesn't take much to get sun scald. If the fruit are unprotected, there's no leaf cover, they're going to get it. Okay. Is there one more question? I think we're done here. So thank you for coming and thank you for inviting me.